All right. So this PowerPoint is about religious wars caused by the Protestant Reformation. And so that should lead you to realize that, hey, these wars are going to be over religion. It's going to be Europeans fighting other Europeans, Catholics versus Protestants. Okay. And these are the ones that deal specifically with France. You have the War of the Three Henrys. Guess who wins? Henry. Where there are two French Catholic Henrys and there's one Huguenot Henry. Now, what faith is the Huguenot faith?
Calvins?
Calvinist, exactly right. If they're English Calvinists, then they're Puritans. If they're French Calvinists, then they're Huguenots. Now, Calvinism is a part of the Protestant church. So this is still Protestant versus Catholic. Okay, it's just this specific brand of Protestantism. Okay, then we have the 30 Years' War, all right, and the War of the Three Henrys is from 1587 to 1589, very short war. The 30 Years' War is much longer, approximately 28 years longer, and that's from 1618 to 1644. And again, this is Catholics versus Protestants, but whereas the War of the Three Henrys was a war fought in France, the 30 Years' War is going to be a war fought in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, which family controls the Holy Roman Empire?
Technically the Habsburgs, but there's like a ton of local lords on them.
Exactly right. Technically, the Habsburgs, Charles V, also known as Charles I of Spain. But you're exactly right, where it's decentralized and there are a lot of electors and princes and nobles who are vying for power. That's the reason that they break off from the Catholic Church in the first place and protect Martin Luther. Okay, now the family that protects France or that rules in France is the Valois. Okay, eventually, however, they're going to die. They're going to transfer to being a different family once the War of the Three Henrys is over, and we'll get the Bourbon dynasty. Okay, the Bourbon dynasty in France is Catholic. The Habsburgs are Catholic. Okay, but the French want to undermine Spain, and so they side with the Protestants. Okay, that is going to critically weaken the Habsburg dynasty and the Habsburg power in Europe. So Spain is on the way out, France is on the way in. Y'all may remember that in 1588, that's when Spain lost against England when they tried to invade after the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. And so Spain had their golden century during the 16th century. Then France is going to rise and have their golden century during the 17th century. And then finally, England in the 18th century. Okay, so we switch superpowers every 100 years. Spain came to power due to the exploration in the old world. They made all that money, but it also led to inflation, and they're defeated by the English. Then France, okay, is going to rise to power under absolute monarchs in the Bourbon dynasty. And then finally, the English. Are we good so far? All right, so now let's take a look at the Valois family. Dang it. It switched over. Hold on. Valois dynasty. Go on, open. There we go. And so you may want a sheet of paper to write this out. I've also got the picture of this on the lecture notes in Schoology. So if you want to look at it there, that's fine as well. But it's critically important that you know these players because these are going to be big players in the War of the Three Henrys. Okay, so first we have Francis I, and I misspoke when I said Mary, Queen of Scots, was married to Francis I. She was actually married to Francis II. Okay, so she wasn't married to his grandpa. She was married to Francis II. But then Francis I had Henry II of France. This is another reason why these Roman numerals are so important. Okay, Henry II of England is completely different generation, completely different century than Henry II of France. Okay, so Henry II, hold on one second. Henry II married an Italian woman by the name of Catherine de' Medici. The Medici family in Italy was very, very powerful. Okay. They control, like, remember, they put some popes in charge. They got their family members into the Catholic hierarchy and they rose in power. So it makes sense that she would be married to the King of France. Now, together, they had 4 children. Their oldest son, Francis II, their second oldest, Charles IX, and they don't get these Roman numerals until they're crowned king. Okay, so first they're just Francis and just Charles. Then Henry III was their youngest son, followed by their daughter, Margaret. Okay, so when Henry II dies, his oldest son takes the throne and is crowned Francis II. Now remember, he was married to Mary, Queen of Scots, but they didn't have any children together. So when Francis II died young, Mary had to go back to Scotland, okay, until she could become Queen of England, which she never gets to be because she gets executed before she can take the throne. And that means the next in line is Charles the Ninth. Okay, now remember, when a child is too young to rule by themselves, the Queen Regent, their mother, makes the calls for them. So Catherine was the puppet master, right? She was very, very powerful and very influential because she could control the government of France, not directly, not by saying, I'm in charge, I'm the queen, I'm calling the shots, but indirectly through her children, because her children would listen to her. Now, Charles IX dies without having any children. So the third in line is going to be Henry III. Remember, his dad was Henry II. That means he's the third Henry. Okay, so this is where we get into the War of the Three Henrys. We have Henry III, and then we have Henry of Navarre, and then we have Henry of Guise. Henry of Guise was a duke, a French duke, so he is a nobleman. Henry III, the king, was Catholic. Henry of Guise was Catholic, but Henry of Navarre was Protestant. Specifically, he was a Huguenot. And he was married to Henry III's sister, Margaret, who also had dated Henry of Guise prior to her marriage. So all of them are somehow connected to Margaret. Now, here's the issue. Henry III is the last male of the Valois dynasty. He needs to have an heir. He needs to have a son. Otherwise, the next person who's going to be in charge of France would be Henry of Navarre, and he is a Protestant, okay, which remember they believe is heretical. But he does have a claim to the throne through his marriage to Margaret. Okay, this is what is going to lead to the War of the Three Henrys. Catherine de' Medici doesn't like Henry of Navarre because he's Protestant and because the Huguenots are a huge pain in her butt. So she makes a plan. She plans that when her daughter gets married to Henry of Navarre, she's going to give them a little wedding present. And the wedding present is mass slaughter. Okay, a bunch of Huguenots come to Paris for the wedding. Okay, Catherine de' Medici knows this. She knows that her enemies are coming to this wedding, her daughter's wedding. And so she plans, well, if they're all in the same place, why not just kill them all while they're at the wedding? At her own daughter's wedding. It's like, yay, surprise. Like, talk about like the worst mother-in-law of all time. Like, tries to kill you the moment you get married to her daughter. Okay, and so this is going to be a massacre, the St. Bartholomew Days massacre. And this is what starts the war between the three Henrys. You have Henry III siding up with Henry of Guise versus Henry of Navarre. Okay, because Catherine doesn't want a Protestant taking the throne. And she knows that she's only got one son left, and if he dies without an heir, then Henry of Navarre becomes Henry the Fourth. Okay, and then she would be in big trouble. Okay, so this is why it's called the War of the Three Henrys. You have the King of France, the future King of France, and a French Duke who had one time dated the sister of the King of France and the wife of the future King of France. Not as dramatic as the English mess that we've been looking at, but still pretty, it would make for good TV. And it does. Like if y'all have ever seen the show Reign, it's about this. Are we good so far? All right, so back to the PowerPoint. The War of the Three Henrys was a religious and a dynastic war. Religious, obviously, because it's Catholic versus Protestant. Dynastic, because it's talking about two family lines. You have the Valois line that ends with Henry III. Okay, when he dies without an heir, which, spoiler alert, is going to happen, the next person in line isn't a Valois. Instead, it's a Bourbon. So this is going to start a new family line. Just like when Elizabeth died, the Tudor line died with her, and it started the Stuart line in England. Okay, so it's dynastic because it would be an end to the House of Valois and the beginning of the House of Bourbon in France. So you have Henry III of France, the king, plus the French Duke, Henry of Guise, versus Henry of Navarre. Okay, Catherine Medici is the Queen Regent. Here she is pictured. And she knows that when Henry of Navarre marries Henry III's sister Margaret, he has a claim to the throne. And so here she is looking in the aftermath of the St. Bartholomew Days massacre. She was the one who ordered this to happen on the day of Henry and Margaret's wedding, because she has all of her enemies in a central location. Okay, so this massacre is going to end in over 20,000 Protestants, French Protestants, being killed during this day. And that means war. So Henry of Navarre actually escapes. He is not killed in the St. Bartholomew's massacre. So now they have a leader to lead them in this war against the Catholic Valois. Does anyone have any questions about this slide? Okay. So we know that Henry Valois was really controlled by his mother. We know that his two older brothers died before they can have children. Francis II, who was married to Mary, Queen of Scots, and then his older brother, Charles IX. So he's the last of the line, and he's completely controlled by his mother. But once he dies without an heir, she's going to have no one left to control. And so she will fall out of power. And he is going to die without an heir because he is going to be murdered by a Catholic extremist. Okay, now the reason for this is Henry III kind of does an oopsie. He ends up killing the Duke of Guise. The Henry that he was allied with against Henry of Navarre. And the reason he does this is because he gets jealous. So once he kills Henry of Guise's followers are going to kill Henry III. The only Henry left standing is going to be Henry IV. No, I'm not kidding you. It's straight up like he's not very smart. All right, when you think about it, he hasn't had to make a lot of decisions by himself. His mama has been making them for him because she's actually the one in charge. She's the one who tells him what to do. And then he decides, well, I'm mad that Henry of Guise is getting too much power with his Catholic League, so I'm going to murder him to death. It's like, you killed the wrong Henry, dude. Like, yeah. Okay, so the Duke of Guise formed the Catholic League. Okay, y'all may remember that the Protestants in the Holy Roman Empire formed the League of Schmalkalden. So basically, this is France saying, hey, Catholic allies, help us stamp out the heresy. Okay. And so another super Catholic country during this time is Spain. Now, y'all may remember Philip II, the ex-husband of Mary Tudor, Mary the First, who also was the one who tried to kill Elizabeth by invading England. Okay, so Philip II is going to help the French against these Huguenots to prevent France from becoming Protestant, because they fear that if Henry IV, Henry of Navarre, Margaret's husband, if he takes power, then France will no longer be Catholic. Okay, so the Duke of Guise forms a league. And at first, Henry III is going to support the league. He's going to say, yes, let's get these Catholics in here to wipe out the heresy. Let's end this war. But then the league ends up controlling France, and Henry III says, no, I am an absolute ruler. God gave me the power to rule, not the league the power to rule. And so because of this power struggle, he is going to kill his ally. Henry III, the King of France, is going to assassinate Henry of Guise. And here's an artistic rendition of that assassination going down. So Henry of Guise is bleeding on the floor after being stabbed. And to add insult to injury, Henry III is just standing there posing like, oh, candid photo. So I'm going to stroke my beard and look really smart while also stepping on your chest. Okay. Now, Henry III thought, oh, now I'll be in charge of the league and thus France, and I won't have to worry about any other Henrys taking my power. We're just going to continue this war and defeat Henry of Navarre. Well, he didn't account for one of Henry of Guise's followers assassinating him. I think this was actually in Assassin's Creed. Y'all know, like, it's a historical drama. I think in that video game, like, you can actually perform this act in history where you're a Catholic fanatic who kills Henry III of France and thus leads to the Bourbon dynasty, like zip line into his carriage or something. And so that means Henry of Guise dead, killed by Henry III, and then Henry III dead, killed by a Catholic, which means the only Henry left is Protestant Henry. Yeah, I see in your chat, Navarre must have been really confused when someone went up to him and told him he was king now. It's like, okay, I guess I'll take it. It's like, okay, so you're telling me the two Henrys that were allied against me ended up killing each other, essentially. It's like, yeah, okay, here's your prize. He's like, okay, bet. Bourbon dynasty, what? So Henry of Navarre becomes the next king of France. Now, remember, he was Protestant. He was a Huguenot. However, most of France is Catholic. Okay, so he, like Elizabeth, is a politique. A politique is someone who puts political matters above religious matters. Okay, Elizabeth was strongly Protestant, but does that mean that she went extreme Puritan Protestant in England and started rounding up Catholics and executing them? No, because she knew that that would lead to war, that would threaten her power. She was more concerned with keeping power than she was enforcing her religion. Henry of Navarre, now crowned Henry IV, is going to be the same way. He knows that France will not follow a Protestant king. And so he has to publicly convert to Catholicism. Okay, so was this a genuine conversion that he was like, yeah, actually Catholicism is better? No, this was a political move. He said that Paris is worth a mass being the Catholic church service on Sundays and Wednesdays. So he said it's worth it to convert to Catholicism, even after they killed all my homies at my wedding. It's worth it to convert to Catholicism if I get to be the king of France. And he knew that he couldn't control France without controlling Paris, and Paris was not about to let a Protestant rule. Okay, so this is yet another example of the decrease of the power of religion and the increase of political power. He is, however, going to institute some religious tolerance, even though he's Catholic now, wink, wink. he is still going to pass some laws that allow Huguenots more freedom. And this is, in his treaty, the Edict of Nantes. This is one of your vocabulary terms. The Edict of Nantes was where Protestantism was legalized in France. Now, does that mean that France is Protestant? No. It just means that the French Huguenots, okay, the French Calvinists, are allowed to practice their own religion instead of being, burnt at the stake for heresy. Now, they were segregated to certain cities, okay? They were not allowed to practice or assemble in Paris, which remember is the capital. And there could be no Huguenot church in Paris. So you're going to see spots of France that are heavily Calvinist, but not the capital. So the change over time that we see from the Edict of Nantes is that it allows for some religious tolerance, only of the Huguenots. Okay, so this isn't like, let's bring in the Lutherans, let's bring in the Jews, let's bring in the Muslims. It's kind of like the Peace of Augsburg in Germany, where the League of Schmalkalden won against Henry V, and he said, okay, fine, you can be either Catholic or Lutheran, but you have to pick only one of those two. So in France, under the Edict of Nantes, it was you have to be Catholic or Huguenot. Those are the only two options. So some similarities there, some comparison between the Edict of Nantes and the Peace of Augsburg. Are we good so far? Y'all distracted by his legs? I always get distracted by his legs. He's like portraying himself as one of the Roman Greek gods here. Like he's got a 3-headed dog down here that he's stamping. And he's just like, yeah, check out these calves. He knows his angles. All right, so that moves us into the 30 Years' War, which is not going to be waged by Henry IV. Okay, it's going to be waged by his son, Louis. And just prepare yourself, because we're going to have a ton of Louis. It's basically like every French king decides, what is my king name going to be? Oh, I'll do Louis. And it's like, how many Louis can we possibly have? So his son, Louis XIII, is going to be the one who is fighting in the 30 Years' War. After Louis XIII, we have Louis XIV, the Sun King. He's super, super powerful. Then, of course, Louis XV, Louis XVI, who's the one married to Marie Antoinette. He's the one who gets executed for treason. So throwback to what Elizabeth did to Mary, Queen of Scots, setting that precedent. And there's going to be Napoleon and then a bunch more Louis after that. So it goes on and on. Everybody's a Louis. So it's important that you remember these Roman numerals to know who's doing what. Now, whereas the War of the Three Henrys was fought in France, the 30 Years' War is going to be fought in the Holy Roman Empire, which, remember, we today know as Germany. Okay? This is a war between the Catholics and the Protestants. But wait a second. I thought we already had this war in Germany. You're right. The Schmalkalden Wars. With the League of Schmalkalden. Remember that in the Schmalkalden Wars, it was the Catholics from Spain / the Holy Roman Empire versus the Protestants who were protecting Martin Luther for their own political gain. Now, who won in that war? Definitely the Protestants. Charles V had to sign the Peace of Augsburg, allowing for people to be either Catholic or Lutheran. Those are the only two options. Well, now, less than 100 years later, you have yet another war. And in this war, the Protestants are saying, we don't want to just choose between Lutheranism and Catholicism. We also want to be able to practice Calvinism. So this is going to be a war fought over adding one more branch of Protestantism to the list that's allowed to be practiced. Now, this is the war where the French, the Catholics, are actually going to side with the Protestants. Okay, Louis the 13th, with his advisor, Cardinal Richelieu, which is always fun to spell. Okay. Oh, isn't this the war where like 1 out of 5 Germans died? Oh yeah, it's going to devastate Germany. That's one of the long-term effects, the major effects of this war, is that Germany gets wrecked. And that's also going to contribute to the fact that we're not going to have a country of Germany until around 1871. This is one of those major factors, because this is where all the fighting's happening. It's not happening in France. It's not happening in Spain. Everybody and their mama, literally, on like the entire continent of Europe, is sending troops to Germany to fight. Okay, so Germany is gonna, it's not gonna be cute. Okay, so Cardinal Richelieu, like Henry IV, is a politique. He knows that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So even though he's a cardinal in the Catholic Church, he is going to side with the Protestants to spite Spain, to spite the Habsburg dynasty, which at this point, Charles V is no longer in charge of Spain. His son, Philip II, okay, the ex-husband of Mary Tudor, is in charge of Spain. And remember, how Catholic is Philip II? Super Catholic. He tried to invade England to make it Catholic again. Okay, so he's going to want to go all out against these Protestants, which is part of the reason why this war lasts for 30 years. Are we good so far? But like his daddy, he's not going to end up winning this. So the things you need to remember about the 30 Years' War is that it's mostly fought in Germany. Okay, so the damage is primarily going to be in Germany. This involved all of the major European powers. Okay, so this is the first continent-wide war. Everyone in Europe, okay, is somehow tied to this war. Throughout that 30-year period, everybody gets their chance to fight. Now remember, what is the issue with this war over? It's over religion. This is actually going to be the last major war over religion in the European continent, because after this war, everyone's like, okay, enough. We can't keep fighting about religion. Let's start fighting about politics instead, because if we keep killing each other over who is loving Jesus the right way, there won't be any of us left. So this is actually the last religious war in almost a century of wars over religion, Christians fighting Christians. Now, the reason that the Germans wanted to push back against the Habsburgs in Spain is because they wanted more independence. They saw a political opportunity here with this war. So they're saying it's not good enough that you let us be Lutheran. We also want to be Calvinist. Now, why did France here in the middle side with the Protestants instead of with the Catholics, since they were also Catholic? Because they wanted to spite the Habsburg family, which ruled not only the Holy Roman Empire, but also Spain. Look at how France is here in the middle. This is not a good place to be in between two enemies. Okay, you don't want a two-front war. Now, Sweden and Denmark up here in the Nordic states are also going to want some political power. They want to prevent the Habsburgs from intruding on their territory in this Baltic region, thus called because it's next to the Baltic Sea. Okay, so it's important to remember that almost every European country is going to be involved in this war. And it is a war over religion, quote unquote, but really it's about political power, which is why France is going to side with the Protestants instead of the Catholics. Does that make sense so far? All right. So what were the problems going on in the German states at this time? Well, back in the Smalkalden Wars, you had the Peace of Augsburg, which allowed for two different faiths, Catholic and Lutheran. That is further going to decentralize Germany. It's going to undermine the power of the Habsburg dynasty. The Catholics are going to lose Catholic lands to those Protestant princes in the Holy Roman Empire. Because remember that land is power, land is money. So the princes knew that they could get political power plus wealth if they converted to Protestantism, because they could claim all of this Catholic land as their own, which is exactly what Henry VIII did with his active supremacy. Remember that he collected all of the land and the tithes that had formerly belonged to the Catholic Church, and he used them to build up his military. Okay, the Counter-Reformation. This was the Council of Trent, which was the Catholic response, their reaction to the Protestant Reformation. Now, what did the Catholics change in response to the Protestant Reformation? What did they change? Did they change their beliefs?
They kept their sacraments and they kept a lot of their stuff. They changed that you can go to heaven if you do good works and have faith, as opposed to just the good works.
Okay, so they didn't really change too much. They kept their dogma, they kept their sacraments, they kept their Bible, but they did curtail some corruption. Okay, but by that point, could the Counter Reformation truly end the Protestant Reformation? No. Okay, so the Counter Reformation was not enough to pull the Protestants back into the fold. Okay, then Charles V / Charles I dies, and his son Philip II comes to power. And Philip is super Catholic, so Catholic that he forms the Catholic League to help Henry III in France, which, remember, that fails. Okay, so once he fails with the French, he's going to take all the troops that he had compiled in the Catholic League, and he's going to send them to the Holy Roman Empire to enforce Catholicism. All of these factors lead to the 30 Years' War, which is going to involve, like I said, everybody and their mama. Okay, so this may look like a lot, this chart, but it's actually pretty easy to read. Wherever there's white, it means they weren't involved in fighting at all. Wherever it's black or gray, that says they're for the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, so the Habsburg family. So that would be Catholic countries. Now, obviously, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire is going to be pro-emperor. Okay, obviously Spain, who's ruled by the same dude, Philip II, is going to be pro-emperor. The papacy, they're Catholic. Of course, they're going to be pro-Catholicism. Okay? In red, we see mostly Protestants who are against the emperor. So England, definitely against the emperor. But France is Catholic. But remember, they are anti-emperor for political reasons. Okay, now the different shades of pink versus red versus black versus gray shows whether they were directly involved, like sending money and troops or sending troops to fight with them, or if they were indirectly involved, trying to gain support. Okay, but in the end, the emperor is going to lose. There's going to be another peace treaty, the Peace of Westphalia, which is also fun to spell and fun to say, which ends the 30 Years' War. The Protestants end up winning. The Habsburg dynasty is further weakened, okay? But the Holy Roman Empire is going to be further decentralized, thus slowing down the creation of an official Germany. Okay, and that's where we're going to leave off for today. When we get back tomorrow, we're going to finish this PowerPoint and move on to absolutism in France. So we're going to move on to the Louis of France after Henry IV. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns before we dismiss for today?
Wasn't
All
this
right.
also like the start of the gunpowder age? Because like I thought I remember reading about Sweden a lot about that about his name was like Adolphus or whatever, and he used a ton of artillery, and then matchlocks also came into fashion.
Yeah, we're kind of going to see a change in how warfare is fought during this time because of the proliferation of gunpowder weaponry. But the Muslim empires like the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal are really going to take advantage of that and rise to power. There's also the defenestration of Prague, where a Catholic gets thrown out of a window. That's what defenestration means. It's being thrown out of a window. So the more you know, it's a fun word. It's like, oh, I'm going to defenestrate you. Like, hold on, let me Google what that means before I call the cops. But one of the most important things about this war, it's the last religious war, or the last war fought overtly over religion in Europe. There's like, we're tired, we're done with this. Like, let's fight about political stuff instead. They become the next superpower of Europe. But eventually things get weird. There's a whole French Revolution. They end up beheading their king and a whole bunch of other people in France. And then England becomes the superpower in the 18th century. So you're looking at change over time. Who holds political power? Who holds religious power? But another change that's going to occur as a result of the Peace of Westphalia is that there's no more wars fought over religion. So a positive there. Christians are tired of killing other Christians, even if they are being heretical. Okay? So positive effect, age of religious wars are ended. Now, instead of fighting over religion, they're going to fight over politics. So this begins the balance of power theory, where if one nation starts to get too strong, all the other nations in Europe are going to gang up to take that nation down a few pegs. This is actually what happens with France with Napoleon. When Napoleon takes power after the French Revolution, he looks like he's about to conquer the world. Like he's going to take over all of Europe and no one can stop him. So to maintain the balance of power, all of the other Europeans put aside their differences and join forces to fight France, to fight Napoleon. Okay, so balance of power politics is going to be hugely important in future slides in this unit. In terms of negatives, the war was fought for 30 years in Germany. Yeah, France was sending troops, Spain was sending troops, Italy was sending troops, but they were all going to Germany to fight. So Germany was physically scarred. 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 Germans die in this 30-year period because of the warfare. It's very disruptive socially. It's disruptive to the food supply chain as well. So the Holy Roman Empire no longer exists. They're no longer a political and cultural leader. Instead, they're 300 different territories, all ruled by different dudes. I was going to say territories. The Habsburg family is weakened. They lose the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain is left broken, no longer in a golden century. Okay, so goodbye, Holy Roman Empire. Calvinism is in, it's legal. Protestantism is not going away. The Counter-Reformation of the Catholic Church failed. So the Catholic Church's power also decreased. Long-term effect. Are there any questions? Okay. Does that say territories? Yeah, I'm sorry. That's 2 R's. Territories. Over 300 territories instead of an empire. Politically and religiously fragmented. Then I want y'all to go into the folder for Reformation and Revolutions And I want you to watch this video that's linked in the lecture series. So if you go into lecture series, you'll see this video. And it's a map of the territories that were pro-Habsburg and anti-Habsburg. Remember, it's not always about religion. Even though France was Catholic, they were still anti-Habsburg. Okay, so for the rest of the class period, I want you to watch that video, and that will finish our PowerPoint on religious wars.